Okay, perfect. You started the webinar.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I think we have more students who are joining us, so we're going to start in about like 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, before we start the webinar, we do want to let you know that we have the Q&A tab that you can use to put your questions there. But while Kenya is doing the presentation, I want you to focus on the presentation itself, because some of your questions might be answered in a later slide. So please focus on the presentation first. And if you have valid questions, you can put in the Q&A. And also we have time to for you to ask questions after the presentation. So you can ask at that time. I think we're gonna wait 1 more minute, maybe. While we are waiting, I do want to introduce myself and Kenya to you all. So I am Ya, and I think you have received many emails from me about our events. So I am the manager of International Engineering Student Experience. So I work in the ISSC, the International Students and Scholars Center, but I am the liaison between ISSC and FSE. So I work with all engineering international students. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will let Kenya introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kenya. I am a manager here at the ISSC as well. I do oversee the CPT process. So most of you, when you submit your CPT request, you will see my signature in your I-20s. If not, you will see it from one of my my team members.
Thank you, Kenya.
Let me know when you want me to get started.
Okay, I think you can start now.
Okay, perfect. And like y'all said, if you guys have any questions throughout the presentation, just feel free to add your questions through the Q&A option, and she'll be able to help. But it's very important for you to follow the presentation and focus on that, because your questions might be answered throughout the presentation. And there's also at the end we'll have the Q&A section for you guys, so that way if none of your questions were answered throughout the presentation, they can be answered at the end. If not, we can discuss on how you can get that answer. So for today's agenda, we'll go over CPT regulations and policies. CPT, we'll go over the application process through our office. We'll answer some Q&A, some common questions, sorry. And like I said, the last thing is, we have a Q&A section. Okay. So what is CPT? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about CPT. So what CPT is stands for Curricular Practical Training. So as an international F1 student, in order for you to partake in an off-campus internship, whether it's paid or unpaid, you need to have off-campus work authorization. And one of the options is CPT. And so the thing about CPT is it's connected to your degree program in the sense that you have to enroll in an internship course. So basically for your internship, in order to get CPT, you have to make sure that that position is integral to your degree program, since it is connected to an internship course. And another thing that's very important about this is that, it does have to go hand in hand with a degree program. Sometimes some students, they want to do an internship with, they say they want to do let's say you guys are in engineering and you want to do something in supply chain management. Unless it is connected to engineering, there wouldn't be a way for you to do curricular practical training, because it has to be connected to your degree program. And this authorization is provided by the ISSC, while the other authorization, pre-OPT, that's provided by USCIS. So really, CPT is at no extra cost to the student. The only cost will be the actual tuition for the internship course that you have to enroll in. So this is probably the safest way and the fastest way for you to get off-campus work authorization, as long as you meet the other requirements. When we mean integral to a degree program, we say that, you have to meet one of those options that are listed here on the screen. So meaning that you either have the internship course has to be required for all students in the degree program, or if this internship course will count towards the completion of your degree program, meaning that it will count towards the completion of your IPOS or your DARS, or if it's integral to your thesis and dissertation if you are a graduate student. So that's how integral to your degree program is categorized here at ASU. In regards to eligibility requirements, so this is very important. For any off-campus work authorization as an F1, you have to meet a minimum of 1 academic year as a full degree seeking student in the US. There are some exceptions. So for example, if you are a graduate student, then you can surpass the 1 academic year requirement only if the internship course is required for all students in your degree program before that 1 academic year is completed. Now, if you are transferring to ASU from another institution or from a different visa status, and that you were previously, you completed 1 academic year at that other institution or in the other immigration status before you transfer to ASU, I would say, you would have to contact us. We'd have to review the documents, review your transcripts, and we would let you know whether or not, you have met that 1 academic year at a previous institution or in a previous immigration status. Now, if you do, like, let's say you did your undergrad and then let's say you do your bachelor's degree and then you do post-OPT right after your bachelor's degree, that post-OPT is considered a break. So therefore, if you were to pursue a master's degree, you wouldn't be eligible for CPT in that first semester, because technically, the academic year that you completed in your undergraduate degree it's basically erased from your 1 academic year qualification, because post-OPT is considered a break, if that makes sense. Okay, so work opportunity requirements, like as I previously said, has to be related to your major of study. You must obtain a work offer before you can apply for CPT. The reason is because, so you basically, with this work offer, you have to take it to your academic department, and then you have to let them know, hey, this is my work offer, this is what I have. Can this count towards that internship course that I have to enroll in for CPT? So that's why the work offer has to be done before you apply for CPT. And then it has to meet the curricular objective. So that's why you get that work offer, you take it to your department, and then they let you know, they'll like reach out to your professor of the internship course, and typically that's how it's done. And then they review it and they see, okay, will this internship meet all the course requirements? And if they say yes, then they'll let you know, yeah, this is a good internship course, and they will approve your process. A 1099 is not allowed on CPT, because a 1099, what a 1099 is, for those of you that don't know, is when you're an independent contractor, you're not considered an employee of a company, you're considered your own company, and you're offering your services to the other company. And so that's what an independent contractor is, which basically means that you're self-employed, and you cannot do that while on CPT. So that's why it's not allowed. So whenever you're looking for internships, I would always double check with the company. Is this a 1099 type of employee, or am I a W-2, which basically a regular employee getting paid by the company? Now, if it's unpaid, then you don't have to worry about that part. So for unpaid opportunities, a lot of students think that because the opportunity is not paid, they're not required to do CPT. But under the F1 regulations, when it comes, CPT covers everything that's training related to your degree program. So if you're going to be performing duties that's related to your degree program, whether it's you're observing, you're doing deliverables, or you're actually like having like an actual schedule that you have to commit to off campus, you need CPT authorization. And so unfortunately, we've had a lot of students face issues because they've worked off campus without authorization for an internship, because without CPT authorization, and because they didn't think they needed CPT authorization or off-campus work authorization because it was unpaid. And so that's very important, that, if you get an opportunity and you don't know whether or not what type of work authorization you can do for that, always reach out to us, because we want to be preventative on this matter so that, your F1 status is safeguarded. And then, and another thing too is that a lot of the time some students are like, well, if it's unpaid, how is the government going to know if I don't have to pay taxes or whatever? One thing that we've seen with students who are applying for post-OPT or H-1B is that, sometimes you have to provide a resume, or you have to provide if you list, like, the thing about the government is that they're going to find out, right? So even if you're thinking, oh, let me, they're not going to find out, they'll find out. So it's better to make sure you don't commit this mistake, so that later on in the future, when you're applying for STEM or post-OPT or, H-1B, you don't run the risk of those applications being denied because of a mistake that you did, earlier on in your immigration journey here in the US. Okay, so CPT policies. So when it comes to CPT authorization, when we issue this, we issue either part-time or full-time. So this is something that you will need to confirm with your academic department, whether or not you can do part-time or full-time CPT during the semester. Typically during the fall and the spring semester, students don't really do full-time CPT, just because some departments want the students to focus in their degree program and their classes, not have to work and things like that. Because it's like more than 20 hours. So if you have you're enrolled in 18 credit hours and you're doing 40 hours of internship on top of that, like, how are you going to be successful in your degree program? So a lot of your academic departments, they have rules for that. So I would also say, have that conversation with them and say, hey, if it's in the fall and the spring semester, be like, I'm interested in doing full-time CPT. Is this something that it's allowed in our department and for my degree program? And they'll let you know. If it's not, then you can do part-time CPT. Part-time CPT means that it's 20 hours or less. And then full-time, of course, 20 hours or more. But it's very important that if you receive part-time CPT authorization, you don't go over those hours when you're working on the internship. We've had students who've gotten in trouble because they got part-time CPT authorization during the summer, and then they were like, oh, their employer asked them to work like 30 hours 1 week. Because they worked beyond those 20 hours, that was a violation of their F1 status. So they had to, we had to talk to those students, and there was consequences for that. So always be very careful about that. If you always check your I-20. When you get an I-20, in the second page, it's going to list there whether you have part-time or full-time CPT. And if it says part-time and that's what you requested and that's what was approved by your academic department, you're good to go. Just make sure you're not doing more than those 20 hours. Now, we are human. My office is where my team is, we're human, so we might put, sometimes there's been a situation where I put full-time when it was part-time. As soon as you receive that I-20, you see that, let me know, send us an email, and we'll fix it right away. Because we want to make sure that your authorization is reflecting the actual amount of hours that you're working, and that was approved by your academic department, because we don't want to risk your immigration status. Okay, so full-time policies, I know, like I said, some of your departments might have rules about this. If I'm not incorrect, yeah, some departments have like a GPA requirement in order for students to do full-time. And to also maintain like good grades and things like that. So that's something you have to be careful with your department and know that you have those rules. And also at the end of the day, even if your department allows full-time CPT during the fall and the spring semester, you always have to remember that your primary focus is your education. So make sure that your internship is not affecting your grades for your degree program, because then that defeats the purpose of an F1. And also another thing to keep in mind is that if you do 12 months or more of full-time CPT authorization, you won't be eligible for post-OPT, which is another off-campus work authorization that you get once you complete your degree program. So that's very important. Some students, that's why they try to minimize the amount of full-time CPT they have, just so that they don't, that doesn't affect their post-OPT eligibility. So that's something to keep in mind. What I have some students do is like, they'll check in with me and they'll be like, hey, how many months of full-time CPT authorization have I done? How many more months do you think I can do so that doesn't affect my full-time my post-OPT eligibility? And so then I'll just take a look and I'll let them know, like, this is how many months you've done. Like, I recommend, like, from now on, don't do more full-time, do part-time. Because the thing is, like, when it says full-time CPT on your I-20, that counts towards your 12-month limit. If it says part-time, it doesn't. So for example, let's say you got 6 months of part-time and then you have 8 months of full-time. Only those 8 months of full-time authorization counts towards the 12-month limit. The 6 months of part-time that's if it didn't happen when it comes to this limitation. So what a lot of students do is they just do like, as long as it requires from their degree program, and it's allowed, they prefer to do part-time, so it doesn't affect, the post-OPT eligibility. I do see a question, but I recommend you ask in the Q&A section, because we're not going to allow people to speak in here. Thank you. Okay. So for out-of-state CPT, so I think this is a very important part, because we do have a lot of students who are now wanting to do internships out of state, just because sometimes, maybe there's not enough work here in Arizona, or maybe you found a better job out of state. CPT doesn't say that you cannot do out of state internships. But what F1 regulations do say is that you always have to maintain your on-campus present during the fall and the spring semester. So if you are wanting to do an out-of-state internship during the fall semester, then how are you maintaining your in-person presence here at ASU during the fall semester? So that's something that, I think it's very important for everyone to consider, because we've had students who they do out-of-state internships during the fall semester, and then the fall and the spring semester, and they apply for post-OPT. The government finds out that they look into it and they see, oh, it says here that they're interning in Washington, in Seattle, Washington, for the fall and the spring semester while they were a student. How did they maintain their in-person presence at ASU, which is their sponsoring institution, during the semesters? And so what that results in, has happened is they would issue what's called a request for evidence for students. And so now the students are required to provide documentation that shows that they maintain their in-person presence in Arizona during those semesters that they had that out-of-state internship. And so what that involves is plane tickets, class attendance from your professors, housing, lease agreements, or anything else that shows that they actually maintain their in-person presence. And now, if after you provide all that documentation, if USCIS knows that, if they're like, nope, this is not enough to confirm this information, then they will deny your request. So you don't want to risk post-OPT or H-1B in the future for an out-of-state internship. What I always recommend is, I always tell students, you have to see if it's worth it, right? If it's an internship that's like a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? And if it's worth the risk of the future, then I would say it's ultimately your option. But we will let you know of the risks, and then you have to confirm with us that, you're aware of the risk and you want to proceed with this. Another thing that what students do to do like a workaround for an out-of-state internship is that they work for that employer remotely from Arizona. So we do have a lot of students who are working remotely for companies out of state while they're here doing their degree programs. And that is a better option, because when that happens, when we issue your authorization, we write a note on there that, you're doing this internship remotely from Arizona. And so that's less risky. That's the best way to go about that. But also sometimes you have to double check with your department, because a lot of the times some departments don't allow out-of-state internships, and some departments don't allow remote internships. So that's something to consider with your department as well. But yes, I would say if you can't stay away from out of state during the fall and the spring semester, try to avoid it at all costs. Other department policies, yes. So ultimately, the first person that's going to approve your internship is going to be your academic department. the one thing that when we come in is we basically just have to make sure everything falls into regulations and we issue the authorization. But the first step is always with your academic department. That you have to check with them, are you meeting the GPA requirements? Are you on the right track for your degree program to add that internship course? What are their application deadline? Some departments do have deadlines for when you apply for CPT. And then working hour caps, like some departments have that. So always start the conversation with your department and your academic advisor, and just start the conversation like, I'm interested in doing an internship that's related to my degree program. Is there an internship course that will count towards the completion of my degree program? Or what's the internship CPT process that you guys have? And they will talk you through it. And then, you can look for a job, and then that way you'll know the deadline. So that way, how fast you have to work looking for that internship and things like that. And then, once you have that offer letter, first go through the process that your department has of getting that approved. And, you enroll in that internship course, and then you go ahead and you submit the I-20 from us, which we'll go over more clearly on the process here. So like I said, you discuss with your academic department, you check and see if, what's the CPT eligibility, how many hours you can work. That way you know what kind of internship to look for. You enroll in the class. And then, you see here in this note that Yacht put, as she's very well connected with Fulton. She knows that some departments do take this much time to approve your internship, to say, yes, this meets the requirements for your degree program. So be mindful of that also when choosing a start date for that employer. Then once you enroll in the internship course, your academic department says, yes, you're good to go. They approved everything, the name of they approved the company, the hours, what you're doing, you enroll in the internship course, and that's when you come to us and you submit the CPT I-20E form. This is very important because some students think that just by their departments approving their internship, that's all they have to do. That's what they think. They think, okay, my department approved it, I can work here. That's not the case. You still need to go the second step, which is come to our office, submit the CPT I-20E form so that we can go ahead and issue that I-20. With that I-20, that's like a little blanket that covers you. So basically you can work now for this company. And that the dates on the I-20 has to be valid. So you have to work within those dates on the I-20. You have to work within the hours listed on the I-20. So once you submit the E-form, we contact your academic advisor and we ask them a series of questions to make sure everything looks good. And then once they reply, we get that reply, and then we proceed with your request, and then we will go ahead and issue your I-20. Typically, after your academic department replies to our questions, it can take up to 7 business days, but my team is pretty fast with the process, so it takes a little less than that. So we're pretty quick mostly with issuing those I-20s. It does depend though when it's time for it. Like if you're getting closer to the summer semester, is probably the one semester that it has the highest volume as CPT. So I always recommend to try to be as proactive as possible so that you can make sure you have that I-20 with a CPT authorization to start working on your internship. Okay, so the required documents. So when you submit the CPT I-20E form with us, this is the main document that you're going to be required to provide, which is called the Employer Information Sheet. This is a very important document. The reason is this is a document that we will use to put all the information about your internship in the government website. This is what we're going to let DHS know. Okay, this is a student's company. This is where it's going to be located. Here, this is how we know whether or not it's in-state or out of state, if it's remote or not remote. If it's a third party, meaning that you have like your company is providing services to another company, we will put it there because we are required to put this notes in the Department of Homeland Security website so we can issue that I-20. The dates are very important because we have to know when is your internship starting, when it's ending, and the hours, how many hours are you going to be working there? Because basically all this information here, what I tell students is, you're more than welcome to fill this information out, but just have your employer sign this off, right? And then just send this to us, provided in the E-form. this is very important because we review this and then we review what your academic department says and we compare it. Okay, is everything matching? And if everything matches, then we move forward with your application and we issue your I-20 and you're good to go. If there's some discrepancies, we have to follow up either with you or with your department to make sure that everything's correct, because we don't want in the future for you to have any issues with any other immigration application. So that's why it's very important to have this. Now, there are some employers who refuse to sign any documents that's not from their company. For those, when we see that email from the student telling us, oh, like my employer says they refuse to sign any of this information that's not from their company. Is there any way we can work around that? So when this happens, I just let the students know, okay, if this is the case, I'm not going to have cost you your internship because your employer doesn't want to sign this. What they need to do is they need to provide you an offer letter that's going to have all the information that would otherwise be listed in this information sheet. Because at the end of the day, this is what we need in order for us to give you the authorization. We cannot issue an I-20 if we don't have this information. The system will not allow us. So that's why it's very important to avoid delays, is to just provide this employee information sheet filled out correctly. But if your employer is giving you a hard time, then reach out to us and then we'll provide those instructions for you. The authorization dates, like I said, on the I-20, you're going to have authorization dates, okay? This authorization dates are very important because that tells you within what dates you can work for your internship. You cannot work beyond those dates. You cannot work before those dates. CPT is on a semester by semester basis. So let's say you do an internship in the fall. Just because you did an internship in the fall, it doesn't mean it's going to roll over into the spring. You would have to go through the CPT process again for the spring semester. You would need to have a CPT I-20 again for the spring semester so that you can continue working with this internship. So you always have to check your I-20. Page 2 is probably the most important page for your CPT authorization, because it's going to list your employer, the location of your employer, the amount of hours, whether it's full-time, part-time, and the dates. And so always check there, look and see what it says, and then make sure everything's correct on there, because you want to make sure that you're working within your dates, you're working with the right employer. Because there's some students who change employers in the middle of the semester, and they think, no, I already have CPT, I don't need to apply for another CPT. No, the CPT authorization that we issue is employer specific. Okay, so if that you're not working with that employer anymore, you have to let us know. That way we shorten your CPT I-20. And then if you want to work for another employer, then you have to go through the CPT process again, meaning that your department has to approve this new employer and you have to submit the E-form so that we can issue you a new I-20 that has a new employer's information. Because everything always has to match. You always have to have coverage for who you're working for. Because you don't want to, something as simple as this, you might consider it simple. It can really destroy any future applications you might have. And we really want to avoid that from happening. Okay, let's see. Okay, so when it comes to the employment dates, for the end date, we're always going to give a general end date on your CPT authorization. This general end date is to make sure that, you're covered until that end date. Because sometimes when before we used to put specific end dates per student, and what happened was that employer wanted the student to continue working. Let's say we had a student who was like, it was for the fall semester, and they initially had an October 15th end date. And this employer wanted the student to continue working with them until the end of the semester. And the student, they never came back to us. They just continued working with them until the end of the semester. But because it worked outside of those authorization dates, they violated their status. So there was a big issue there. And so we had a lot of students that was happening. So what we just did is we say no, like we're going to just give general end dates for all students. So if you're graduating, your general end date will always be the last day of finals. That's always going to be your end date. If you're non-graduating student, your end date is always going to be the day before the next semester, because that's technically the end of the current semester. So let's say if you are a continuing student and you have CPT in this fall, and you're continuing into the spring semester to take classes, your CPT authorization for the fall will be January 11th, because the spring semester starts on January 12th. Again, this is to avoid that issue, because it doesn't matter if you don't work until that date. What matters is if you work beyond that date. So that way also, what this allows, for example, it's like if you have an internship in the fall that's going to continue to the spring semester, you can apply for CPT for the spring early on, as soon as you enroll in the internship course, and we can issue a start date that's right after the end date of your fall internship. So that way there wouldn't be a gap in your internship between the fall and the spring semester. That's also why we did it as well, to help students with that, with those situations. And then, you're not eligible to start working or performing any work activities until you have that I-20 with the valid dates on there. Okay, and then something also to consider, when you're working on campus, generally you're not required to do CPT because that's an off-campus work authorization, but there are some on-campus affiliates that do require like off-campus work authorization, which is ASU Foundation, Education at Work, Maribella or Mullet Arena. Those require off-campus work authorization. What I recommend is we have an on-campus employment website in our ISSC website that has a list of all the employers on campus that are considered on-campus employers. I would say look at that. If you're in a situation when you don't know your on-campus is your employment is on campus or off campus, look at that website and you will see. And always reach out to us if you have questions. Honestly, I don't mind answering 5 million emails of students asking me, is this an off-campus work authorization, or is this required, or what off-campus work authorization do I need for this? Because I rather look into it, answer you, and let you know, hey, you do need work authorization before you actually start working. Because after you start working without off-campus work authorization, then that's a big issue, and we have to go through a whole other process for you, which is it's a very unfortunate process that I hate doing. Okay. Important reminder that y'all wants me to give you guys is FSE has 8 schools. Each school has their own internship policies. Each school has their, they have their GPA requirements, their work hours, work locations. So you have to make sure you're communicating with your academic advisor and seeing what is allowed for your department. Because what I would hate for you is for you to think that you can work full-time and you put in all the work as possible to get that full-time internship, and then your department tells you you're not allowed to do full-time during the fall or the spring semester. That's a department policy. Then all your hard work and all the time that you spend for this full-time goes down the drain. So always very important, check in with your academic advisor first. Ask them what is allowed for your degree program. Do you do full-time or part-time? Can you do remote, or it has to be in person? That way before you put in all the work, because right now the job market, it's a mess. So you don't want to waste your time in looking for jobs that you are not going to be allowed to work for anyway. So always, do yourself a favor, be proactive, and reach out to your academic department. Okay, so let's go over some common questions. Can I be approved for CPT and also work on campus? Yes, because like I said, so there's CPT, which is an off-campus work authorization, and then there's on-campus, which is 2 separate work authorizations. So you can do both. There's nothing on F1 regulations that says that you cannot. However, you have to think about it at the same time as your primary focus is your education. So if you have a part-time of 20 hours on campus, then you have a full course load, but then you have, part-time or full-time CPT at the same time, like that's a lot of stuff going on. And so if it starts affecting your GPA, your coursework and everything like that, a USCIS officer at any point when you're applying for anything that's post-OPT STEM or H-1B or any other immigration applications here, they can look at it and they can see your work history, and they can, be like, did you prioritize your education? And they can ask for your GPA, your transcript, and things like that. So you never want to be in a position and where it looks like you're using your F1 status for work, not for education. So very important to, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do on-campus and CPT, keep your grades up, make sure you're doing good in school. And, ultimately that's why priority is always going to be school for you as an F1 student. Okay, next question. while authorized for CPT, can students work remotely for a company located outside of the US? Yes, so this is something that you can do, and this is something that our global education office helps with. We've had a lot of students who are working for non-ASU employers while here in the US, but they still require to do CPT, but that's still an option. So even so, let's say if you know at your home country there's this really cool company that's willing to like, you know, hire you for an internship while you're here in a degree program, you know, they talk about it, see if your department allows this for you, and this is something that you can do. But you will still need off-campus work authorization, because while you're here in the US, you have to make sure that you have authorization to work. Now, if you are outside of the US, it doesn't matter, but while in the US, you do. Well, this is something that we touched on earlier, which is you cannot do a 1099. That's a simple fact, no 1099. So always check in with the employer and see, is this a regular job or is it a regular paying job, or is it a 1099? And save yourself a favor of the headache of having to, you know, deal with that. If you're not eligible for CPT, I know I alluded to this earlier in the presentation, there's another work authorization for F1 students that's called pre-OPT. So what pre-OPT is basically you apply for off-campus work authorization through an EAD card, an employment authorization document. This application is done through USCIS. So, and you don't have to enroll in an internship course for pre-OPT, but you do have to request for an EAD card. And then you can only do part-time during the fall and the spring semesters. There's no exception for that. And any time that you do on pre-OPT will be deducted from your post-OPT. So in total, you have 12 months of OPT. Whether you use it in pre or post, it's up to you. But if you, let's say we do 6 months of full-time pre-OPT, then that means you only have 6 months of post-OPT left. So it's very important that you think about that. But this is an option for those students that their department say, hey, you don't have an internship course that will count towards the completion of your degree program, or that's required, or that's integral for your thesis and dissertation. So then you would go through the pre-OPT route. That's only if this internship that you want to do is actually worth it. We do have a website on pre-OPT as well, and where you can go and look at that information. That's very helpful in there. And because it is approved through USCIS, the turnaround time for pre-OPT is around like anywhere from 3 to 4 months, I think, right now. So it does take a little longer. So keep that in mind for that. And anyways, if you guys have any questions about CPT or anything else in regards to employment, always feel free to send us an email. Like I said, I do not mind your guys' emails about, you know, off-campus work authorization. Even my recommendation is, if you're going to ask me whether you need off-campus work authorization for something, always provide the job description of the role that you want to do, because that way we can review it and we can see. Now, because we can't just go solely based on what you're saying, because what if you're not giving us all the information and we tell you yes or no, then, you know, it's like the telephone game there. So if you have any questions on what type of work authorization you would need, or even if you need one at all, just provide your offer letter or anything that has a job description. We do have in-person advising on Mondays and Thursdays from 1 to 3 p.m. here at the Tempe campus. If you are at the downtown Phoenix campus, there is an advisor there on Mondays. And then if you're at the West campus, there is an advisor there on Tuesdays. And on Poly, I'm not sure what days they're there, but there's also an advisor there. But for those of you who do not want to leave your home, or, you know, your time availability is not manageable for you to go in person, we do have virtual advising, and that is the time slots there. But that is it that I have. That's all I have. So are there any unanswered questions? Okay. So there's this question that says, I have CPT I-20, the end date is December 10th. I would like to know if I'm eligible to work after this end date. I'm doing a remote internship. If my employer is willing to give me remote work, can I go to work remotely from India as I'm going home this semester break? Do I need a new CPT? So there's two parts to this question, right? You're asking if you can work beyond the end date on your I-20. So for those of you who were here when I was talking earlier, if you're working, what is the one thing that we must do for the I-20? We have to check the authorization dates. And what cannot happen? You cannot work beyond the authorization dates listed on your I-20. So if your I-20 is saying that your end date is December 10th, which is weird, it shouldn't be December 10th. For all the fall semester, the end date should be December 11th, December 13th, unless if you are a thesis or dissertation student, then that's different. So that's a little weird that your end date is December 11th. But anyways, you cannot work beyond the end date listed on your I-20. Now, if you're wanting to work remotely from India, like I said, whatever you're doing outside of the US, you don't need work authorization for that. So if you're interested in working from India over there, then you can, but just have to keep in mind that if it is a US employer, they're going to be charging you they're going to be filing, like taxing you as a US based employee. So this might bring issues for you in the future. In regards to when you apply for H-1B, post-OPT, STEM or anything like that the USCIS officer might say, why was this person working outside of the employment authorization dates? And then they will issue you an RFE, and then you would have to prove that you were outside of the US doing this job. You weren't here, so that's why you didn't have work authorization for that. But while here in the US, you have to always work within your authorization dates. During the semester break, are we allowed to do remote outside? I already answered that part. If I change my visa status from an F1 to an L2 under my spouse who works in the US, does impact CPT? Well, okay, so if you're changing from an F1 to an L2, then you need to speak with an immigration attorney about that. We can't give you any answers on what's going to happen to you, because when you're an L2, like CPT and OPT no longer apply to you because you're not an F1. CPT and OPT is only for F1 status holders. Okay. Am I eligible for CPT or OPT if my visa changes from an F? I already said that. CPT and OPT is only for F1 status holders. So if you're an L2 or any other status, that doesn't apply to you. You're transferring your 12 credits from an academic institution outside of the US during your. No, so only if you're in a degree seeking only your time in a full-time degree seeking program here in the US can count towards your one academic year, as long as there's no breaks. So anytime you did a university outside of the US, that time that doesn't count because you weren't in a degree seeking program full-time here in the US for that. Okay. So someone says, I did part-time for the spring semester and fall semesters. I also did for full-time living. It will be. So I'm guessing this is whether or not it would count towards your 12 months of 12 months of CPT, right? So only, let's say you did part-time in the spring and the fall semester, right? That time that you did, the part-time that you did in the fall and the spring semester, that doesn't count because it says part-time CPT authorization. Only the time that you actually did full-time CPT, that will count towards the 12 months. So let's say you did part-time spring, full-time summer, part-time fall, only the full-time in the summer counts towards the 12 months limit. Nothing, the part-time doesn't. I am a fall student currently enrolled in 9 credit hours next semester, 9 credit hours. Can I do an internship in summer CPT? If authorized, yes, because you completed your full-time student here in the fall, and you completed full-time in the spring, so that's 1 academic year. So by the summer, you would have met the 1 academic year requirement, so you're good to go.
And also you need to meet the department requirements like GPA or
Oh,
good
yes.
academic standing. Yeah.
Yeah, so make sure you have a good GPA too. Okay. I already answered that. So, okay, so this person asked again, if their transfer time from outside of ASU counts towards to the 1 academic year for the CPT. No. Only your time here in the US as a full-time degree seeking student counts towards the 1 academic year requirement. So not any time outside of the US, it doesn't count. Okay, that seems to be all our questions.
Yeah, kind of quiet today, but yeah, if you have any questions, we are gonna stay here maybe for another 5 minutes. So you can just put your question in the Q&A and we will try our best to answer your questions. But if you don't have any questions, you are free to go. Thank you for joining our webinar today. And I will be sending a follow-up email to you all with the slides attached to you. So I will be getting the record of your email address for today, maybe by next Monday. So I will be sending a follow-up email by next Monday. There's another question, Kenya.
Have 2 years of OPT, does a 6-month full-time CPT will deduct? I think what you're trying to say is if full-time CPT will deduct from your post-OPT time. No. CPT doesn't deduct from your post-OPT time. What it does, if you do 12 months of full-time CPT, then you cannot do post-OPT altogether. So it doesn't deduct. You only have a cap of 12 months of CPT full-time. So that's where that is. Okay, I had a question. Let's say a student graduates, has no job on hand, and the student is an international student. So let's say when he applies from his home country, gets a job in the US, will he be here on a H-1B or their STEM visa warrant? Okay. So the STEM OPT is an extension of your post OPT. If you don't apply for post OPT and you've gone over, there's a 90-day unemployment limit for post OPT, and so basically you go over those unemployment days, you have to depart, you forfeit your post OPT. You're no longer eligible for STEM because you didn't end your post OPT at the end date given by USCIS, so you can no longer extend it to STEM extension. In regards to your H-1B question, I cannot answer that question. We are only advisors for F1 status holders and all the benefits for F1 status. So if you have H-1B questions, you have to speak with an immigration attorney about them. To find out all department requirements for CPT, should I ask my academic advisor? Yes. Ask your academic advisor, have that conversation. Besides, one thing I recommend as someone who has graduated from ASU, both my bachelor's and my master's, is build a relationship with your academic advisor. Even if you just want to have random questions, like build that relationship with them so that they know they can help you, they can give you guidance. Because a lot of the times your academic advisors can provide to you like what route to take when it comes to internships and what companies are out there and things like that. So start that conversation with your academic advisor. Okay, so you only need off-campus work authorization if you're going to work off-campus while you're inside the US. Okay, so if this student asking if they need off-campus work authorization when they go to their home country during break, do they need off-campus work authorization while they're outside of the country? No, you do not, because you're not in the US. Now, if you have CPT let's say your CPT authorization ends on because you're a continuing student, your CPT authorization ends on January 11th, right? And you're wanting to depart the US and continue working from your home country. CPT authorization, because it does say until January 11th, that means that you're supposed to be here in the US doing this practical training inside the US. So, why would the CBP officer, when you come back, they may inquire to you as to why did you depart the US when you're supposed to be here completing your practical training here in the US. So if you still have questions about this, join us in virtual advising so that we can go over and provide more clarity for you. In next spring 2026 and fall 2026, the only credit I have is a thesis. So this depends. you have to ask your academic department, right? You have to ask them and see, am I eligible for an internship course that would count towards my completion of my degree program? Or can I do, you know, if you're doing like a research credit, can I do an internship course through this research credit? You know, ask your academic department that. Because some students do that. And since you're thinking, I'm assuming since you have to enroll in fall semester of 2026, that means that, you know, you're still a student during the summer semester. So really, here the matter is, you could essentially do it as long as your department says that you can. And they would guide you on what course you will need to take in order to do that internship, whether it's a designated internship course or a research credit hour course. But yes. Okay.
All right, I think we answered all the questions. Thank you all for attending our webinar again. And as I said, I will be following up with you with the slides attached. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our office or reach out to me or reach out to our academic advisor. So we are always here to help you. Thank you again for attending our webinar, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Kenya, for the very, very helpful presentation.
No worries, my pleasure. You guys really feel free to send us an email, come for in-person advising, virtual advising, talk to your academic advisors. We're all here to help, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Bye.
Bye.